Amazon has certainly been in the news lately. First of all, it is doing bang-up business since the pandemic hit as people sit home and shop instead of hitting the stores in person. Plus, workers at a huge distribution center in Alabama, they just had to vote on whether or not to unionize, and they overwhelmingly voted against organizing. It's a big win for the company, but workers' rights advocates say it is a big loss for their cause. My next guest, he wrote a new book about the company. It's called Fulfillment, Winning and Losing in One-Click America. I want to bring him in now. Let's welcome Alec McGillis. Alec, thank you very much for the time.
Thanks for having me.
Obviously, you knew when you started this project, you had an idea of Amazon, both its reach and its impact, but I fully expected to take a look at inequality, but when I first looked at this, I assumed it was going to really be that the consumption model was exhibit A in squeezing out the mom and pops or retail and buying online, but it reached so much more than that in terms of creating the haves and have-nots. Curious, did you see all the context before you started the project, or did you really think of it as, you know, more a treatise on how we consume things and its consequences?
That's a really good question. I actually started the book not focusing on Amazon. I actually wanted to write a book about disparities in America, sort of regional inequality, the growing divide of our country into sort of winner-take-all cities like Seattle, San Francisco, New York, and DC, and a whole larger group of left-behind cities and towns. I've been watching that gap grow for years, and it's very unhealthy for our country. It's unhealthy for both kinds of cities, actually, and I wanted to find a way to write about it. And then I settled on Amazon as a frame to kind of come at that story. Amazon is a good frame because it's so totally ubiquitous now in our country that it's just a good metaphor for what we're becoming as a country. It's a good thread to take you around America, but it's also a good frame for it because it is itself helping to create these regional disparities, these incredible concentrations of wealth in places like Seattle, while so many other parts of the country are kind of losing their commerce, losing their regular sort of business activity to those winner-take-all cities.
You know, for any author, it's always helpful when the news, in some ways, supports the premise or the need for the book. And you have both headlines and also cultural moments right now that speak to it. The vote that I just referenced in my intro. Explain why a labor force that by definition right now often are seasonal, they're not paid well, they don't get as many protections, certainly as we would have seen, forget about a generation ago, even less than that. Why would they vote in a way that was arguably against their self-interest?
It's a tough question. I think it's going to take some while to work this out. But my basic sense is that what you actually, the answer in a way lies in your question, that there's, in a way, the workers at these warehouses have become so transient, really just seasonal or just staying for a year or less than a year, that they have much lower expectations now for what they're hoping for to get from a job. It's not something that you're going to do for any long time. You don't care that much if you don't have any real voice on the job, if it's not, or you don't really care that much if it's not something that you can really build a career around, because you're just coming there for the time being. The turnover in a lot of these warehouses is about a year. 100% in the course of the year. So that's a big part of it. The other part of I think the outcome is the fact that our labor laws make it incredibly tough now to organize new unions. It's been that way for decades, that the playing field is really kind of tilted toward employers. And there's been again and again these efforts to reform our labor laws, but they keep falling short of a filibuster-proof majority in the Senate. There's a bill right now that passed the House, but again, it runs into the filibuster in the Senate. So that's where we're at right now. And I think it'll be really interesting to see if activists keep trying at the warehouses. My hunch is that you're going to see less attempts to actually organize the warehouses with full elections like this one, and more attempts just to kind of draw attention to working conditions by disrupting work with various kinds of strikes, sit-down strikes, walkouts, that kind of thing.
You know, I mentioned a cultural touchstone to this. For those folks who haven't gotten to see the movie Nomadland, first of all, it's a great film, but also one of the characters, the Frances McDormand character, is that Amazon employee. She's seasonal, she's transient in many ways. The idea of fulfillment, and even in your book you reference, you know, at a job fair, I think it was in Virginia, you know, build yourself a great story is emblazoned there. Do people feel, and you spoke to many of them, and to put a human face on this, do they feel that Amazon has abandoned their promise to them? Do they feel that this was really their only option? How do they view Amazon as part of their identity after working there?
I think it really varies probably by age in a way. For younger workers, there's much less expectation of getting any kind of real meaning or purpose on the job. I think for a lot of younger workers, it really is just a job. You're coming in to do it. You're not going to stay long. You're going to make some money and you're going to leave. For older workers, I think there is a sense often a sense of a real something that's been lost and something that they're missing because they've known something different. There's a figure in my book who worked for several decades at a big steel mill here in Baltimore, where I live. Was the biggest steel mill in the entire world in the 1950s, and he was there for 3 decades, working really tough, often dangerous work, but making good money and finding real meaning and camaraderie in the job. And then when that steel mill went away, it was completely wiped off the face of the earth in recent years, and it's been replaced actually by 2 Amazon warehouses. And he went back to work at one of them, and he barely lasted 3 years because he just found the work so much less purposeful. He felt so much less identity in it. Didn't know any of the other people on the job. It's a very sort of atomized, kind of isolated work in the warehouses. Didn't have enough time to go to the bathroom. Was just constantly being ridden by these younger supervisors to bring more and more pallets in on the forklift. And he barely lasted 3 years. He was making less than half as much money as he was making at the steel mill. So for him, it's really, he felt that difference from what work could be. But I think for a lot of younger workers, this is all they've known.
It's interesting because, and I'll speak personally, when Jeff Bezos bought the Washington Post, for those of us in journalism, it was an uplifting moment in that there'd be at least one beacon of real investigative journalism that wasn't going to have to worry about cutting to the bone. But when you look at the scope of Amazon and you compare the mission statement of Henry Ford, as you did in the book, which was his idea was he wanted his workers to have a living wage. Jeff Bezos, who's a hero to many on the left, that's not part of the vision. And I'm curious, Bezos, with what he obviously believes in, both politically and what the Washington Post stands for versus what he does within the walls of Amazon, how did you circle that square?
It's tough to. I mean, I think you maybe have to look to other sort of precursors from our history beyond Henry Ford and look to guys like Rockefeller and Carnegie and guys who built up these incredible empires that were all about growth and control and dominance and essentially monopoly. I mean, and that's the moment we've kind of arrived at with that kind of just hunger for growth and dominance and just constantly wanting to get bigger and bigger and more powerful. And that really is at his core is this belief that if you're not growing, if you're standing still, then that is essentially death. Then everything kind of falls apart. So you have to be growing, pushing always to get bigger and more powerful. And there's a key moment in the book where I actually asked one of the early investors in Amazon, a guy by the name of Nick Hanauer, why the company hadn't decided to put its second headquarters in a city that could really use it, a city like St. Louis or Cleveland or Baltimore, instead of putting it in Washington, D.C., which is already the richest city in the country. And that would have done such good for the country to put the headquarters in a city that could really use it. It would have rebalanced prosperity across our landscape. And Nick Hanauer said to me, he said, look, you don't understand. This is not how the company thinks. They are only thinking about what's best for the company. If they think it's best to put the company in Washington, partly because they want to have a lot of influence in Washington, then that's what they're going to do. They're not thinking about what's best for the country.
It is a fascinating read. It's not just about, obviously, Amazon, but it's where we are today, and especially in, as he says, in the one-click America. The name of the book, Fulfillment. Hey, I really appreciate the time, Alec, and best of luck with the book.
So much. Really appreciate it.
You too. All right, folks, when we come back, we'll wrap things up.